एवरीवन, स्वागत है आपका किस्सों की किताब के एक और एपिसोड में। तो आज हम बात करने वाले हैं ईला मुखोटी से, जिनकी बुक द लायन एंड द लिली द राइज एंड फॉल ऑफ अवध हाल ही में रिलीज हुई है। तो आइए जानते हैं उनसे कि इनकी बुक किस बारे में है और इनके रिसर्च पे भी थोड़ी हम उनसे बातचीत करते हैं। So, ma'am, your book, The Lion and the Lily, The Rise and Fall of Awadh, it talks about the turbulent power struggle in Awadh after the end of the 7-year war between Britain and France. So, what made you pick up this particular subject?
So I was, on the one hand, interested in the way in which the French were involved in the country. I have a personal, kind of connection to that. My mother was French.
Okay.
So we grew up learning a little bit about the French in India, but very little. So I was very intrigued to know what exactly happened. Why did they disappear? Why do we not remember their influence at all? Did they have any cultural influence? Did they have any material influence? What do we have around, remaining of them? And what happened? Why did they lose to the British, basically, So when I started looking at that broad question, I realized it was too big a subject, 150 years, such a big country. So I thought I would focus in on one region. And Awadh fascinated me because the French were influential here, but also the Nawabs were such charismatic and beguiling characters. You want to know more about them. You want to know more behind the caricature of this, dancing, singing kind of Nawab. You want to know really the men and women that shaped this history. So that is the long-winded answer to your question.
Okay, all right, interesting. So, while you were researching for the book, so did you come across any special anecdotes that you would like to mention?
Yes, there were so many anecdotes. So, one was in terms of cuisine.
Okay.
So you know that here there is a technique where we use malmal and we put the whole spice, the curry kind of spices, and put it in a stew or
Right.
something. So I saw a source which said that the French have a similar system.
Okay.
Yeah, so they have a system where they put spice, but for them, of course, it's rosemary, thyme, and basil and things like that, and they put it in a little cloth. And so there was a question of who got influenced by who.
Right.
So that was always very interesting to me to see the finer details of culture, how they could be influenced by one or the other. And there are many such stories to do with the cultural influence.
Okay, so since your book deals around the 7-year war between Britain and France, so did it have any influence on Awadh's fate and the culture that followed after the war?
I think on the one hand, because the French lost the 7-year war and they had to make peace with Britain. So peace with Britain in Europe meant that all around the world, wherever they had territories, they had to be in peace with the British competitors. So in India, whenever they had factories in Pondicherry, Chandanagar, wherever the French had territories, they couldn't fight the British for them anymore. So it really put an end to French ambitions. They knew that from now on, it would be very difficult for them to get, at least territorially, it would not be easy for them to do anything in India. So instead, it changed their ambitions. And the minister in France at that time, there was a famous minister called Choiseul, and he said it will be a policy of revenge. Okay. We will get our revenge against the British for our loss in the 7 Years' War. And he specifically spelled it out. And he said we will block them using Indian rulers wherever we can.
Okay.
So that was the main reason why we see them, for example, in Mysore. Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan literally got their backing from the French because they had been given this order that you must block the French with any Indian ruler who is willing, who has the ambition, who has the vision. And Tipu and Hyder Ali were one such ruler. So they really were influential in that way of trying to build up an Indian power's capability, and that's why they were here in Awadh and they helped Shuja-ud-Dawla and Asaf-ud-Dawla to modernize their military.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, ma'am, your book highlights the roles of many unconventional figures, like royal eunuchs and foreign adventurers as well. So, could you share something on that? Did you come across some interesting facts
I did.
while you were researching for your book?
I really came across so many interesting facts. And I'm glad you brought the eunuchs up because I'm not able to talk about them often. People don't think to ask me questions, but yet they were so influential because if you can imagine, we were talking early on about these women, the elite women, were all in very strict parda.
Right.
So how could they operate with the outside world when they wanted to operate and they had ambitions and they had the money and the resources? How would they negotiate with the outside world? They did it through their elite Khwajasaras, the elite eunuchs, which was a tradition that had been coming for centuries. The Mughals also had Khwajasaras.
Right.
So these elite women would have one particular man, eunuch, that she would trust be above and beyond everything else, because these people had no family links of their own. They were often lifted from different regions, brought to these courts, sold into this kind of work, and they had no children. They couldn't have children. They didn't marry. So their loyalty was completely given to their employer. And so obviously, so these women also really trusted them to a great extent, and they were very they became very powerful. And what was funny, I found, was that through this account of Faiz Baksh, who tells us about the Zenana, so the eunuch of Nawab Begum was always fighting with the eunuch of Bahu Begum about who had more power, because Bahu Begum had more money. She was the senior woman. Nawab Begum was still an older widow, right, from an older generation, Safdarjung's wife. So there would always be squabbles, and all their entourage, they would always posture around Faizabad that I have more men, I have more horses, So that was very funny. And one time they almost came to blows. They almost started shooting at each other because they thought that something serious had happened. But they were just gathering around. So that was very fun to see. The other unexpected thing was that there was eunuch called Mia Alma Salih Khan. Okay. And he was extremely famous in his time because he was a very good administrator of his lands. He had Bahu Begum's lands, and he was organizing all of it, generating income and administering it. And I read in the accounts that he was very careful to keep the powerful talukdars in their place and to promote the smaller cultivators like the Lodis, all the small people who really had ties to the land but had no power. And he made it, this whole area, a really, really prosperous country that even the British were praising him many years later, that this man, wow, this country was called the garden under him because it was so flourishing. And yet we have totally, we don't remember his name at all. He founded a town called Miaganj. Because, he was that famous and powerful. He had his own army bigger than Asafuddaullah's army. So all these facts about such an extraordinary man, we have completely forgotten. I think it's interesting to look in this multifaceted world that the people were living in at that time.
Very true. And also these eunuchs played a major role in shifting the power dynamics, right?
Huge role. So when this incident happened that Raja Chaid Singh was attacked for not giving up enough money, the eunuchs rose in revolt. So Nawab Begum and Bahu Begum sent out their eunuchs. They couldn't obviously go. They gave orders to their eunuchs. The eunuchs went into the countryside, gathered men, organized rebellion, brought them to Faizabad, brought them to Lucknow. Apparently, they created pandemonium for the British, so they were very politically influential because they had the Nawab or the Begum's backing, they had the money, and they could go around in the world and, do their, interact with people and gather.
In fact, they were more free to roam around than the Begums.
Of course, they were completely free. And they had the wealth, so they had horses, they had everything. There's a long section about these eunuchs in Faizabad, how they had different conveyances. So in the city they had palkis or they had sedan chairs, and then when they wanted to go out they were on horseback. They even were allowed to sit on an elephant, which was a very rare honor. Only the emperor or the elite were allowed. So they could be on an elephant if they wanted to, the major ones. So it's very interesting, when you piece together their lives, how important, politically important, culturally important, because they emulated whatever the Begums were doing. So they also kept poets, they also kept philosophers, scholars, and had those majlises. So imagine that all around the town you're having different majlises, some by the eunuch, some by the Begum, some by the Nawab, and what a place it must have been.
Definitely. So ma'am, one last question. So your research spans from English to French to Persian literature as well.
Yes.
So can you tell us something about that? How was the research? How interesting was it?
The research was really this time fabulously interesting for me because, I'm used to having, now I don't read and write Persian, so I can only access it in the translated form, in the English form. So up till now I've been doing my research like that. This time, because I do read and write French, I was able to access a primary source in a foreign language, being able to understand it and the nuances in it. So one of the really fun things was this biography of this count, this French count, because the kind of terms he uses, the kind of descriptive, even the insults he uses, are very clear to me what he means. You know, when he compares some local ruler of some smaller country. He says he's like a Norman. A Norman is from the northeast of the northern coast of Europe, and I know what he means because there you call somebody who's very conjuice and tight with their money, you call them a Norman. So
Basically a miser.
A miser. So I knew what he meant by that insult. So it was a real pleasure to read the sources in French and to be able to finally get the real nuances, because so often when you read a text in English translated from Persian, it looks clunky and you know it's been misinterpreted.
Right.
You know there's something missing, but you can't do anything about
I
it.
mean, translations can never be 100% correct.
They are never 100% correct, and Persian is a tricky language.
It is.
As it is. It has multiple meanings. So you have to get a really good scholar to do it. So this was really exciting for me, and I hope it brings an extra layer to the reader as well.
I'm sure they love you. तो ये थी हमारी बातचीत ईला मुखोटी जी से. इनकी बुक रिलीज हो चुकी है, and you should definitely get a copy for yourself and find out what the book is all about.